Welcome to the January 26th, 2022 meeting of the Chappaqua Central School District Board of Education. It is now 7:40. The board has been in executive session. Can I have a motion, please, to reopen the public meeting?
Aye.
Please stand for the pledge of allegiance. Would our fellow students like to please? Thank you. So we're going to start tonight with our presentation by the Bell students before we move on to the rest of the agenda so that our wonderful young students can go home and get on with their evening.
So I'd like to welcome Bell School and Mr. Weiner, who will be introducing our students today and leading the Bell School presentation. At each meeting, during the first half of the year, each principal has had the opportunity to introduce and share innovative programs that have been happening. And tonight is the Bell Middle School's night, and then at our next meeting, Horace Greeley will conclude those presentations. So, Mr. Weiner, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having our students be a part of this evening, and thank you to their families for allowing them to participate tonight.
And thank you, Dr. Ackerman, and thank you to the members of the Board of Education for having us this evening. I'm really excited to share some of the great work that's going on at Bell. I'm joined by our assistant principal, Nicole Kelly. Two members of our staff, Tabitha Sasso, our STEAM teacher, and Teresa Orlandi, one of our reading teachers. I'm also joined by three students. We have Nathan, 8th grade, and Anika in 6th grade, and Nate in 5th grade. And today we're going to share a little bit about how Bell School uses innovative and flexible instructional spaces to amplify 21st century learning. And specifically, we are going to focus on our STEAM Center.
So we are super proud of our STEAM Center at Bell. I think it kind of exemplifies what it means to have an innovative space where we can apply design thinking and the design thinking process adopted by the district, as well as 21st century skills, most typically, right, to science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. But we've worked in humanities, so we've nicknamed our STEAM Center the STEAM Center now. But we are going to talk some more about how we've incorporated humanities in just a second. We also know that 21st century skills are clearly defined for us as educators and for our students, as are the expectations that we have for our students as they journey through really and out of the district. We know that the skills and attributes that they have or that they need, right, can be fostered in an innovative space like our STEAM Center. So we are proud to present to you guys tonight all the different ways that we are working on that currently at Bell.
Thank you, Nicole. And of course, all of those skills and attributes are, and the physical space in the STEAM Center support the district priorities. And last year at the Middle School Board of Education presentation, we shared with you some of the attributes and the characteristics that are defined by our professional organization, the Association for Middle Level Education, and the essential attributes and those characteristics are reflected in exemplary middle school programs. And all of the work that our students do in the STEAM Center supports those attributes. So I think one of the most interesting aspects of the STEAM Center is the very physical space. And that physical space supports the intellectual work that the students do every day. So whether it is the fabrication area or a collaboration space or any of the other various areas, those spaces support the learning. So if kids are communicating with one another and collaborating and thinking through a problem, there's space for that. If they are building and experimenting, there's a space for that. So those innovative, flexible spaces support all of the learning. And as they are going through those activities and those learning experiences, they're using the design process, moving through the process and moving through the various physical spaces as they move through. Okay. So here is just a small sample of the types of learning and the types of projects that are happening in the STEAM Lab every day. And we're going to focus on the last three on that list. And I'm going to ask the students to come up and share their experiences. So first, Nate, Nate, please come on up. And Nate is going to share a little bit about an interdisciplinary social studies and ELA project that he's actually working on right now.
Hi. So the project that our class has been working on is a historical narrative project in social studies. And the narrative we're writing is about the Aztecs. And we've been studying the Aztecs for a while now. It's been our main unit. And this is kind of just the climax. So like the big thing that's that this unit's been leading up to. And so to make this narrative, we use tech like Google Sites to map out kind of the structure and the process of how we did to get to the final product. And we could collaborate on Google Sites, staying at a safe distance, and work together. And being in a creative space like the STEAM Center is helped a lot because, you know, there were many different ways you had a lot of freedom the way you wanted to learn. And so we could like brainstorm, we could write on the walls, on the whiteboards, we could brainstorm ideas for our narrative, we could take notes on the tables while we were reading articles. And we could also just sit at a table and work on our website with our classmates in our group. So there were a lot of ways to learn and a lot of freedom. But it was also structured, so it wasn't like go write the narrative. It was like we took notes and then we brainstormed and then we wrote the narrative. So our teachers actually had a to-do list to kind of keep us on the same page and show us what we were supposed to do for that day. And then a little challenge that we faced, it was kind of hard to come up with ideas for our narrative, but being able to collaborate with friends and classmates and working together and customizing your learning style was really helpful. And so the final product for everybody's website is 3 pages for each group member's notes, and also a brainstorming page to show the ideas for the narrative, and also a storyboard to show like the scenes in the narrative with characters, dialogue, and setting, and then finally the actual narrative. So this project was a lot. It was pretty hard, but having like a creative space like the STEAM Center was really helpful, and having all the tools that it provided made a big difference.
Thank you so much, Nate. And now I'd like to ask Teresa Orlandi to come up. Teresa not only is she a teacher at Bell, but she also co-teaches one section of social studies with Nate Loeb. And so, Teresa, could you just share a little bit about how you and Mr. Loeb developed the project?
As Mr. Wiener mentioned, I am one of the co-teachers in the social studies class. And we have been collaborating since the beginning of the year, but my role as a literacy specialist in particular was to incorporate some of those informational literacy skills and strategies into the instruction and the course overall. So when we looked at that Aztec historical narrative within the TCI platform that the district has recently adopted, we really saw a real strong opportunity for an interdisciplinary project. And so we collaborated, not only did, Nate and I, but also Mary Devane, the social studies staff developer, who was an incredible resource. He really helped us, really expand the project parameters. We decided that we wanted the students to use Google Sites as their as the technology piece where they could create in person, or if we had students working remotely, but also learning those technology skills, like how do you actually build a site. We had storyboards where the kids could, of course, jot down their ideas and for their narrative. We also have links to narrative craft lessons that are in there for the students to access and kind of self-direct their learning. Mrs. Sasso collaborated with us to help us, create the template for the Google site that we pushed out to all of the students. And she embedded some short videos on how the students, again, could create their Google site and learn about all the different aspects of it. So again, a little more self-direction, but a great deal of collaboration, not only amongst the teachers, but for the students. And I think, the big thing is really that interdisciplinary piece, that these kids are really using technology skills, they're using humanities skills, literacy skills, social studies skills. And so I just think it's been a really positive and deep and rich experience for the students.
Thank you. After the last student has described the project that he was working on in the STEAM lab, we have some examples of those projects here if you'd like to explore them for a couple of minutes. So we have a couple of tablets preloaded with those websites, so you could take a look at that time. Next, I would like to call up Anika, and she is going to talk about the work that she did in the STEAM lab.
Hi, so what we did in the STEAM lab was that we programmed these robots to roll across the floor. And what they were called Sphero Robots. And so what we were told to do is to program the robots to go in a square pattern. So some problems that we had, some challenges that we had were making the robots stay in our perimeter, which is two carpet tiles. And so we figured that out by testing it out in the hallway and figuring out which was a good amount of time. Another challenge was finding the time and speed for our robots. So in the program, you get your robot to go at a certain speed for a certain amount of time. And we overcame that challenge by also testing it. And since we had a lot of to test it anywhere. So some cool things we learned were how to draw, like drawing and block coding, which we had some previous knowledge of, but we also learned a bunch of other things like lights and sound and animation.
Anika, and that sounds easy to program Sphero to just go in a square, but it's a little bit more challenging than that for sure. Tabitha, could you share a little bit about that project from your perspective?
Good evening. It was an amazing time with the students. What was really great is I was able to, just with a little bit of instruction, give the students the task, create a square using any of the colors that they chose, any animations that they chose, any blocks that they chose to use. And what was great is with that inquiry and with collaborating with each other, they were able to discover loops on their own. And from there, we were able to move into patterns and move into different shapes we could use, and then begin talking about angles and speed. And if I want to make a square, does my speed have to be a certain speed, or does it all have to be the same? So then we were having that math conversation embedded within the programming task that we were given, which has really been amazing with the Spheros in general, because we've been able to do that with multiple grade levels, not just with 6th grade. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabitha. So, next, I'd like to invite Nathan up to talk about his experience in the STEAM lab.
Hello. So In 8th grade, we have this thing where every week on Wednesday, we go into the STEAM lab, which, as you've heard, is a really cool space. We get to collaborate with our friends, our classmates, and we get to work on things in ways that we couldn't in a classroom. Like, for my example, we used a piece of tinfoil and put it in water and tried to figure out a way to hold as many erasers as possible, something that you can't really do in a normal classroom, but the STEAM Center allowed us to do that. So when it came to doing this, we were kind of met with a challenge, right? How do you take a piece of tinfoil and have it hold an eraser? That's what we were thinking, and we didn't really know what to do, but in the STEAM lab, we had the opportunity of trial and error. So we took an eraser and put it on the piece of tinfoil, and it floated. But we put a second one on, and it sunk. So we had to try something else. And we twisted it, and we turned it, and eventually we were able to stack like 20 erasers on a single piece of tinfoil from trial and error. Each group that participated in this activity was given a different sheet of tinfoil size, right? At the very end of the day, we all took our data and inputted it on a scatter plot, and we were able to draw a best fit line, which allowed us to predict, if we were given a tinfoil sheet of any size, how many erasers it would be able to produce, even if we had never seen a tinfoil sheet that size in our entire lives, because of the data that we were able to get from our experimenting. The space is really cool, and it really helps with learning. Thank you. Well, you guys have your own tinfoil. If you guys want to come up, you could probably try to do it.
Thanks. While you're trying that, Tabitha's going to share a little bit about the collaboration between her and the algebra teacher.
Hi again. That was hard. Nathan did a great job at describing the actual task. But the goal really was to introduce the line of best fit in a way that wasn't normal, that without the textbook, without a piece of paper, without a worksheet. And so we introduced this task, create the boat. The kids were able to gather their own data. Like Nate said, we put it up on the class. Everyone was able to see each other's data. And then we had a class discussion about what does this data look like? What can we gather from it? Can we predict? And from there, we were able to come to the conclusion and wrap up the lesson, identifying what a line of best fit is. And it was really amazing, and it was awesome to watch the kids discover and have some fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabitha. Students, do you want to go up and see how the board members are doing? For sure.
X-axis happened to be the size of the tinfoil, right? And then the Y was the number of erasers that it held. And each group got like a different size. Obviously, there's only 2 here, but there was like, I think 10 when we did it in class. So we were able to get like a pretty wide range. So, wow, you got a lot. So we were able to get like, is there one inside there? No. I just trying to get the thing to float. Ah. How many did you get? I think that whatever any number is good, but I think that's the size. I think I did my group got the largest size, and we were able to do something that I don't think was most. Oh look, I did a better one. Oh, did it float? Nice job.
There's a balance aspect to this, right? There's like Allison had the great idea. To see how it would fare in bad weather. There you go.
Yeah, and you have the smaller one. Sorry, you have the smaller one, so it's more challenging.
Yeah, I had this one, and it was kind of sad.
Oh, no.
Like it sort of was like, okay, there you go.
Oh.
Oh, that's amazing. I got 2.
Oh.
problem is once it gets wet, it's very hard for it to hold them again because it weighs so much more.
I have to win this thing. 2,
I think
3,
you already
4,
have.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 24.
24? I think you won.
That's it.
You were able to hold over 100?
100.
Well, it wasn't a super fair way. It beat a fair way. Yes, a lot. Like, made it like, yeah, for sure. Like, you know, it's definitely a lot of
Here's my boat.
There you go. Very cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Joseph.
I actually know your sister.
Oh, no kidding.
Okay, so once the board's done, if our students can stay up on stage, because our board would like to ask you some questions about your work. To also note that Kaylee is excellent at coding that little ball.
Absolutely. I'm very impressed. Very impressed. That would be a challenge to code the two like a figure eight. Mm-hmm.
Kayla, you're making us look bad. I floated erasers.
So if our students could go next to Mr. Weiner.
Yeah, come on up.
And he will pass the microphone around, and if our board could...
Sure, I just have one more slide. I'm going to wrap it up, and then we'll Q&A.
Okay.
Terrific. So as far as... Oh, there used to be a picture there. As far as what's next for the STEAM Center, we have so many resources in that space, and we're just scratching the surface. So the fabrication lab, we have a CNC router. We have all sorts of tools that kids could use to actually fabricate the technology that they're designing. So we are developing that, 3D printers, laser cutting, laser engraving, and of course, increasing cross-disciplinary collaboration similar to the humanities projects, enrichment support. The possibilities are really endless. So at this time, if you have any questions for our students.
I have a question, I guess specifically for Nate, but as it sort of works with all of your experiences, those websites that you guys designed were awesome. Like that was really, really high level. And I'm curious, how do you find that the experience of creating something like that as your project, as your manifestation of your learning, if you will, versus a more traditional, write a paragraph or this, that. How do you find that it either helps or changes your learning?
Well, I think reading like articles and then brainstorming helped us incorporate more knowledge and vocabulary from the as text into our writing, whereas just going straight into the narrative would make it a little more not a little less historically accurate. If we read about what games they played and what food they ate and how like the family life and the class structure, we would have more info on actually the Aztecs themselves rather than just going from what we think we know.
Thank you. All three of these projects and presentations were so impressive.
I'm sorry, is it the student at the end here? What was your name?
Nathan?
Pardon?
Nathan?
Nathan, okay. So Nathan, you said you had 100 erasers in your
It was the entire bucket. So it was upwards of 80, and then class ended. And there was a significant amount left, so I rounded.
How big was the foil? The same size as that?
I think it was a bigger size and also a bigger container.
And then again, you said at the end the spreadsheet you plot everything out. Did you go back and do some regression analysis to figure out if I take a 3-inch piece versus an 8-inch piece and see if your data was correct?
Yeah, so we what we did is we took our graph and we took a ruler, right, and we put it on a smart board. We took a ruler, we put a best fit line, right, which went like where we estimated would be the exact middle, and then any point on that line, however, like whatever X value or size of foil, right, then it would correspond to the amount that it should, in theory, hold. We didn't have time to experiment, but I'm pretty sure that it would come up with pretty similar results to what we predicted with experimenting and the data we collected from it.
So we did learn things. So, Anika, I'll give my let me give my facilities report right now. So last week, the Facilities Advisory Committee and the Health and Safety Committee met. We toured Bell School to see how your facilities were and see what you guys are doing. And we went through the STEAM lab. We saw all this tape on the floor, and we were wondering, what's this tape doing here? And we're all like trying to guess why would they be putting tape on the floor? And thank you for explaining this now, so we know why when we walked into the building we saw tape what we were stepping on. So it was very interesting. So thank you for clearing that up for us. And then Nate, you said that this was it was a pretty long project. How long did the project last?
Say again?
How long did the project last?
So we started it, Mr. Landy. So we started it, last the Monday before this Monday. And the narrative should be finished by this coming Monday.
Okay. And then this is a question for your teacher. Have you briefed them on the next project and how long will that last and what's the next step? Yeah, where do we go from here?
Well, we're probably going to, we're thinking about planning a capstone project actually to end the school year with some interdisciplinary project that embeds, of course, the literacy skills, the research skills, but we haven't quite landed on how that's going to roll out. But for sure, we will be.
So this is a building block then?
Absolutely, yes. But
collaborative
and interdisciplinary for sure.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation, guys. This is the highlight of our meeting.
Yes, I have one. So I was looking at the storyboard while my eraser thing was failing because my colleague told me only 3 went on mine because I folded it very small because I thought that if it was sturdier, it would hold more, but I was wrong. But the storyboard, Nate was explaining to me that they worked in groups of 3s and then they collaborated, and I was really impressed that all of the individuals' notes were being shared right on the storyboard. And I mean, it seems like such a simple idea. I'm like, if I had everybody else's notes, it would just make me smarter. I wonder if you ever considered even combining the storyboards themselves together to make them even bigger, since the groups are small initially to start. And if you think that would be beneficial, what do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, like you said, if combining notes works so well, we could combine with other groups, maybe, and then use that to make an even better, more knowledgeable narrative. So yeah, I think that could be helpful and bring it to another level.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Yes, this was really a lot of fun. So thank you for letting us get involved and seeing what we're good and not at all good at. And I'm curious about with the tinfoil, since I definitely struggled over there. When you did this and you made the chart, how do you account for that, not just in terms of the size of the foil, but in terms of the shape? Because we saw that made a difference. So I was wondering how that was reflected in terms of Allison was quite good at bending up the sides and holding more. So I'm wondering how that came into the data to be helpful to people trying this in the future.
So I think with any experiment, at least, I mean, this was a one class experiment. It wasn't like a really like long and complicated thing. Right. So there was variables that I don't think were completely accounted for, like the skill of the builder, right? Right. If you gave,
yes, that's a key factor.
I know, like if you gave an engineering major a piece slightly smaller and a toddler one larger, I'm willing to bet the engineering major would create one that would hold more erasers. Absolutely. But being a class of students who are all in the same class and all the same age,
but different strength. Yes.
Yes, but I feel like everyone had a similar enough level of building skills that it was accurate. But of course, there's going to be different ways people do things. So, yeah, maybe that might have maybe for next time.
Right.
Yes, most definitely. I mean, so what happens a lot of times is once like the tinfoil got like wet, it weighed more, right? So it's definitely going to be harder to hold more with more weight. So if you, let's say, the whole point of STEAM Lab is trial and error and becoming better at things over time. But if you made if you weren't particularly good at it and you made a mistake and then it got wet, it just kind of spiraled because then it was harder to rebound from that. Yeah. So there's outliers in that sense. Also, if you got a little hole or this or that, of course, any experiment. But at least what we do in science class, and we probably would have done this if we had more time, is we would have gone through our data and picked out any ones that might have had some sort of discrepancy or mistake or anything like that.
Thank you. This was great. And with all of these projects, did it give you just more of an appreciation for how innovative the aspects were? Did you have a deeper appreciation for the skill level that they had at that period?
Oh, most definitely. A couple of the facts that completely blew me away. They had at night. They had torches lighting the way in 1500. BCE. BC, and then they made these things called chinampas, which were floating gardens, and they had to get wood, tie them together, hammer nails in, and they made about 1,000 miles of those. Wow. Just floating gardens in the middle of the Lake Texcoco. Yeah.
Wow. Incredible. Well, this has been really helpful, and I was a complete fail on that. So let somebody else talk about that. But thank you. This is really excellent.
Thank you, guys. This was awesome. This is one of the best reasons to come back on the board and be able to participate in these activities. The parents should be very proud. I'm proud. My personality, so they must be overjoyed. Question for you: you guys have opportunities to use the STEAM Center for these interdisciplinary classes and work with your hands and get involved with peers. You also sit in more traditional classrooms, very, what we all grew up with. After doing these kinds of experiments and these kinds of project-based learning, do you think of ways that you could employ that kind of thinking and that kind of work in your more traditional classrooms?
I feel like not only do I think that, but I think our teachers do as well. I know my math teacher, Miss Winter, who teaches my algebra class, I don't know if this was a direct result from being in the STEAM Lab, but at least like within 2 weeks of the school or 2 weeks after being in the STEAM lab, our like the way we started like learning kind of changed a little bit. Like we started, instead of having paper, we had whiteboards and we could write on the glass in the classroom, and everything was much more free form. And I would be willing to bet that that was at least partially from the application of the STEAM lab.
Yeah, I also think that, so we've had, actually my class and the 5th grade has been in the STEAM lab for every single class, science, English, social studies, math. So science, we did Spheros. English, we did this actually really cool street art project. And then social studies, we, did this Aztec project. And then math, we did a really cool project-based learning, which it's long story. So I think definitely the STEAM lab influence, like Nathan said, had influenced our work in classrooms. And I bet there would be more STEAM lab projects within various classes like English or not even science and math, like English and social studies. We probably within the next 2 quarters will have at least a couple more of those project-based learning.
Yeah, our class goes into the STEAM lab a lot. We use it for like every class. For math, this was an option on the last day of school before break. So me and a few friends went over and did this, and we had a really good time. And we've also done this with social studies, where we had to build, make models of tools that the ancient Mesopotamians used. And in English, we are currently using the STEAM lab for a choice board project. And since one of the options is like create a podcast, we get to go in one of the other rooms, so the other rooms in the STEAM lab, which are not in the other classrooms.
All right, so I'd like to, any more questions from the board? All right, okay. So on behalf of the school district and administration, I want to thank you all for coming this evening. Thank you, Mr. Weiner, and thank you to our students and faculty for amazing presentations. So
Thank you for
very
this
much.
opportunity. Appreciate it.
Oh yeah, we need a photo op on the main stage, please. David will come and take a picture of you. Come up on stage, everyone, if you could come center stage, everyone up here, yeah.
Go behind your table.
Yeah, right there, that's perfect. Okay, all right, thank you very much. You can leave that there. We can take care of it.
Yeah?
Yeah, sure,
Okay.
of course. Just
Very
take
good.
the electronics.
Thank you. You can leave this.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, Hillary.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening. I want to start by thanking the Bell students, teachers, and administrators as they're packing up for joining us tonight and for a wonderful presentation. We've loved learning with you. We also look forward in a little while to the presentation on the special education audit this evening. I know there's some confusion as to what's going on with masking and court cases. Let me explain as succinctly as possible. Counterintuitively, Supreme Court in New York is actually the lowest trial court. A Nassau County Supreme Court judge found the governor's mask mandate exceeded her authority and struck it down. Previously, another Supreme Court judge found the mask mandate permissible, so now we have a split amongst New York courts. This almost always leads to an appeal, which the governor has taken. Yesterday afternoon, the Second Department, that's an appellate court, heard the motion for a stay and granted it, leaving the mask mandate in effect for now. So that's where we are right now. There is still a mask mandate in place in New York State. There is another hearing on Friday when we may or may not get a different answer. That said, either way, this mask mandate will not be in place forever. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we have followed the requirements, and should the mask mandate be lifted, then masks will be encouraged but not mandatory, except on the buses where masks will continue to be mandatory. Until then, we are going to follow the requirements. Whenever this mask mandate lifts, I want to be clear that there will not be a mask ban. I am attending a legislative forum next week, which I will report back to on our next meeting. And I expect that the lifting of pandemic restrictions and the parameters for doing so, if this current order stands, will be a topic of conversation, and I will report back on that. But I want to clarify something and simultaneously ask the community a favor moving forward. So as I said, whenever this mask mandate lifts, there will not be a mask ban. Families who choose to can absolutely still send their children masked to school. This means that different families will be making different choices. What I ask is to please not vilify other people's choices, especially to your children. These are hard issues and hard choices. Good masks significantly lessen virus transmission, and our children are hurting and crave a normal school life. Both of these things can be and are true. We've all been living with a lot of fear. Fear about getting sick, fear about never getting our lives back, fear of what these restrictions are doing to our kids. Reminds me, as I was thinking about it, of the opening of Anna Karenina, where it opens, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Every family, every teacher, and every student has struggled differently through this pandemic, but everybody has struggled. So please, as restrictions begin to relax, please remember that our schools are a community and people will make very different choices. And please, let's not have our kids turn against each other. As the wise man Stephen Sondheim wrote in the second act of Into the Woods, when the surviving characters were grappling with how to move forward from death and destruction, someone is on your side, someone else is not. While we're seeing our side, maybe we forgot they are not alone. There are a lot of strong opinions on this, and we recognize that. And everyone is certain that they are in the majority. So I'm just going to leave that this is hard. We will all get through it. But please let's not have it become a divisive issue in the schools whenever we move forward from full masking. Also, if we want to prevent future variants and future spikes and the need for future restrictions, the best tool we have to prevent that is vaccination. So, believe it or not, there are other things going on. We just came here today from our winter retreat from the board and administration. We got to hear from Sandra, the author of How Dare the Sun Rise, a book that our students read in middle school, which is an autobiographical story of her childhood in the Democratic Republic of Congo, who survived the massacre, immigrated to America, and overcame trauma through art and activism. That was an absolutely amazing experience, and we were so grateful to have had her be able to speak to us and to have learned from her. We also got to participate in professional development surrounding gender identity and supporting our students who may be questioning their gender identification and are transitioning or have transitioned, as well as our students who identify as non-binary and gender fluid. So again, that was an excellent opportunity, and we're really thrilled to have been able to have participated in that retreat this afternoon and in that learning. Tomorrow afternoon, I'll be going to a webinar on electric school buses. As many of you probably know, we contract with an outside bus company, but I'm really curious to hear what options are available and what's being financially incentivized to potentially green our bus fleet. And lastly, to our families celebrating next week, we want to wish you a very happy Lunar New Year. February 1 begins the Year of the Tiger, which I learned invokes strength, vitality, and growth. So hopefully that portends well. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Hillary. And so the first part of the superintendent's report will actually be our public consulting group presentation of our special education audit. So if we can just prepare the webinar and allow our guests in. Okay, thank you, David. And let me just, before I introduce Jamie Edelman, our interim assistant superintendent for PPS, who will be introducing our speakers, I just want to remind the community that the Board of Education went through a process to identify an appropriate firm to come in and conduct an audit of a special education program as a result of feedback we received from the community regarding our programming, our testing, our interactions with our families and supporting our special education families as they entered into our process, and feedback we were receiving about the continuity of our programming. So I'm really happy to be able to welcome the public consulting group here tonight with us virtually to be able to interact with the board regarding their questions and their comments based on their review of our program. After our presentation tonight, we will have the presentation available for our families on the website, as well as a finalized report for their review in the near future. So I'd like to now turn it over to Jamie Edelman. Thank you.
Thank you. In just a minute, Matthew Korobkin will be joining us. He was the representative who was in charge of the study that took place here for several weeks about our special education programs. Matthew Korobkin is a senior advisor for special education within Public Consulting Group's education practice. He has had extensive experience in the field of special education throughout his career, and that experience includes special ed strategic planning, compliance, operations, and instructional practice. He has also been engaged in special ed leadership, coaching, and mentorship, and has done lots of work in the area of K-12 assistive technology. So he had a really rich and extensive career in the area of special education. He led a team of other people who were a part of the Public Consulting Group, and he will introduce them as we get started this evening.
And as Matthew and his team are being pulled up on the web, David, because we can't see them, I just want you to know that. David Hayes and David Lees, we're not able to see them, so could you please pull them up at this time? Just for the structure of the evening, we've got a 15-minute presentation on findings and recommendations, and then a 15-minute question and answer period with the Board of Education. Okay, so thank you. Matthew, are you there?
I'm here. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Edelman. Thank you, Dr. Ackerman, and thank you, Board of Education. We're very pleased to be here tonight to present our findings on our special education program review. In terms of the agenda for the time we have together, we're going to do some very brief introductions. We're going to remind folks around what the survey questions were, or study questions were per the RFP. We're going to discuss commendations and recommendations, and then thereafter have question and answer. And we'll be following the timeline that was set forth by the district. Some very brief introductions around the core project team. My name is Matthew Korobkin, project leader, subject matter expert. Very pleased to be leading this work, led the counseling review, and back again for the special education program review. Worked for 2 state education agencies, and prior to that, a career working with students in public schools in the region. So thank you very much. I'd like to let Barbara Gantwork introduce herself. Barbara.
Hi, I'm Barbara Gantwork, the project consultant and subject matter expert. I've been in the field of special education for over 50 years. I worked at the Department of Education in New Jersey, where I was the special education director for the state for about 11 years. For 10 years, I was the assistant commissioner of education for student services. After that, I went to the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association, where I was the consultant for special education, training principals and supervisors in leadership areas related to special education. And I taught aspiring principals the issues surrounding being a principal in an inclusive setting. And it's a pleasure for me to be here as well.
Thank you, Barbara. Dr. Jerry Petroff.
Hello, hi, I'm Jerry Petroff. I'm a PCG subject matter expert as well in special education and related areas. My experience spans across 4 decades to include special education classroom instruction, delivery of speech and language services, the provision of assistive technology, service within state departments of education, and currently as a teacher, educator, and researcher within higher education. And it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Petroff. McGann McCormick.
Good evening. My name is Megan McCormick, and I served as the project support and subject matter expert for this particular review. I have over 17 years of experience as a special educator and special ed district administrator in New York Public Schools and BOCES. So I'm happy to be here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, McCann. So what I'd like to do is frame this around the 8 questions that were put forth in the RFP, which we responded to. I would like to read them verbatim for the folks on the line, just to remind people as to why we did what we did, and we'll talk about how we did it. Number 1, does the district special education program foster effective teacher pedagogy, support, and professional development to support students with IEPs? 2, are the district's continuum of services effectively organized to support a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment for students with IEPs? 3, does special education programming at the district effectively support the academic, functional, and transitional outcomes of students with IEPs, thus preparing students with IEPs for college, career, and/or other post-graduation plans? 4, does the district effectively leverage response to intervention, also known as RTI, for support of all learners, including students who may later be identified as heavy disability? 5, does the district leverage its financial resources to effectively and efficiently support FAPE and LRE for students with IEPs? 6, does the district effectively organize and utilize its human capital resources to effectively provide FAPE and LRE for students with IEPs? 7, does the district effectively maintain an efficient and effective record-keeping system for its special education department that promotes compliance, student outcomes, accuracy, and confidentiality? And 8, do the district's administrators and teachers effectively support or foster supportive, transparent, and accessible relationships with parents and other key stakeholders? In looking at those questions, digesting all of that, and subsequently engaging in a very thorough data analysis, we looked at data, a lot of which came through interviews, focus groups, and document requests through triangulation. We conducted an outcome analysis looking at longitudinal data, conducted an organizational and program analysis, looking at the programming as a whole throughout all the buildings, and we conducted a research and practice literature, looking at best practices across the country as it relates to special education programming. We kicked off this project in June. June 16th, we held a 3-hour virtual meeting because of COVID. 60 community members were invited through invitation sent by the Director of Special Education. Over 50 folks attended. That included cabinet members of central office, building principals, assistant principals, special ed case managers, chairpersons, parents, and school counselors. We conducted analysis. We actually looked at each of those buckets set forth by the Board of Education and the administration, its RFP, to look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, also known as a SWOT analysis. And interestingly enough, the findings of that initial first dive align with PCG identified program strengths, as well as opportunities for improvement and recommendations. We conducted focus groups and interviews. From August to November 2021, we conducted 2 types of focus groups: organizational focus groups and interviews. And those consisted of administrators, one-on-one, two-on-one, as well as other staff. And we conducted a student file review focus group, a series of them, and we'll talk about that in later slides. During interviews and focus groups, we shared with all participants that we would maintain their anonymity. We would not include personally identifiable information about them in the report unless we had their permission. And so under these conditions, participants shared information with candor. And we had a number of participants who were engaged in this process. We conducted a student-centered file review focus group, specifically looking at IEPs. We did it through October into November, and we gathered groups, 12 in total, that were a cross-section of individuals familiar with and frequently engaged in the IEP process, looking at the core areas of special education management, student identification, programs and services, curriculum and instruction, staffing, and parent engagement. And through this process, we engaged with more than 55 stakeholders and learned a great deal in terms of patterns around how decisions are made among CSEs in making determinations within IEPs that ultimately are driving the individualized education programming as well as the programming that supports their individualized education plan. We conducted classroom visits in person. During October 2021, PCG conducted 58 classroom visits across all 6 schools. A cross-section of classrooms. We worked with administration to make sure that we were looking at students classrooms where students with IEPs are placed with a variety of disability classifications as well as needs. And we looked at some key areas. We looked at specially designed instruction. We looked at elements of universal design for learning. We looked at student accommodations. We looked at approaches to co-teaching and consultant teaching. And we looked at differentiation and inclusion. These were classroom visits. They were not observations. They were not evaluative in nature. We were looking holistically at these patterns as it related to supporting the needs of students with IEPs. We engaged staff and families through electronic surveys. This was done in October through central office. Messages were sent to families and staff regarding this survey. It was open for a total of 2 weeks. In total, in terms of survey numbers, we had a total of 109 staff members complete the online survey, and a total of 104 parent surveys completed, which in our view, based on the size of your district and the size of the parent population of students with IEPs, felt that that was a good number of surveys, and also supported the data from many other sources. So this is one point among many as it relates to our observations, our subsequent identification of areas for growth, and our recommendations. So what I'd like to do now first is go through commendations. Then I'll go through recommendations. I will say that in the full report, there is a great deal of time spent on opportunities for improvement. These are not per se recommendations, but they drove recommendations. And so I would encourage you, given our time frame, we're unable to go deep into that in this presentation, but I would encourage you to review that in greater detail in the full report. But let's start with commendations. First and foremost, as it relates to special education services, educator commitment. And this goes beyond just teachers, your principals, building leaders. It was remarkable the ways in which individuals engaged with students, the ways in which families were known, students were known, a type of relationship from administration on down in terms of families that we don't see in other districts. And that is a very high praise. There's a deeply ingrained belief in full inclusion. We'll talk about the challenge there because there's some issue around what that definition means, but people believe that students with IEPs should be included. Out-of-district placement rates are consistent with neighboring districts. The physical school and classroom environment in every instance was clean, orderly, organized, unique furniture supporting students. Universal design for learning, we saw it in almost every setting. Even when teachers couldn't necessarily call it out as UDL, they were doing it. Effective integrated co-teaching. When it was occurring, these teachers were working their tails off, partnering with one another, spending time after hours to talk to each other to make it happen. Reading as a related service, this is a unique aspect of what's among the offerings in your district, and it seems to be well liked among staff as well as families. Your dropout rate among students with IEPs is remarkably low. College matriculation, extremely high. and your achievement gaps on standardized assessments are, as it relates to other districts, something that is worthy of commendation. Next, I'd like to talk about support for teaching and learning. You clearly have a highly talented staff, and you retain your staff. You've invested over recent years in a mentorship program. Everyone spoke favorably about the mentorship program. I think the area where folks would like to see more is they're saying, I'd love to see more about special ed in this mentorship program. But I found it really effective. Your Wilson trained special education teachers, this is something that both teachers appreciated, those who are trained, those who have not been trained because they are not necessarily a special ed teacher, they appreciated it. And overall, a very comprehensive portfolio around professional development. We'll discuss in the recommendations how perhaps there could be some added specificity around special education matters, but it is overall very rich, and teachers of students with IEPs spoke highly of it. Parent engagement. You have a very highly engaged group of parents. We had high numbers of parents attend our virtual parent focus group sessions, and the information they shared was very valuable. On the surveys as well, not just checking the boxes, a lot of quantitative data that was very helpful to us. You have a special education website that's easy to use. We'll talk about, the importance of keeping it fresh and updated, but navigationally to a parent, easy to use. Responsiveness. You as a district, among families that participated in the survey, we heard that parents appreciate the responsiveness and they appreciate the training opportunities. Now recommendations, and as I said earlier, these are derived from the opportunities for improvement. This report details issues and concerns that led to these recommendations, and they're detailed within the report. What I'd like to do is quickly transition to my notes. So in terms of number one, multi-tiered systems of support, also known as RTI, or response to intervention. In New York and throughout the country, districts are no longer calling this initiative RTI. RTI was based on a framework that was very much focused on academics and not so much on the social emotional side. In New York State, from the State Education Department, you're hearing more and more MTSS. In terms of the recommendations, we heard and observed that the district lacked consistent procedures and protocols for the implementation of MTSS. Thus, our recommendations include the following. An MTSS framework. Build on what you already have. You have something. It needs to be enhanced. District leadership team. Develop an MTSS cross-departmental district level leadership team. They should not be siloed in special education. Expectations. Establish, communicate, support, and monitor clear expectations for MTSS with lines of accountability and responsibility. And this is an area where districts often will fall short when they're trying to ramp up MTSS, the accountability and responsibility. Guardrails. Determine what expectations will be required district-wide, and what will be a school-based decision, because inevitably these should be school-based teams, and so require all schools to operate MTSS teams, and in a manner that in itself is also consistent. And professional development, monitor MTSS professional development for all school-based staff, have central office staff develop turnaround trainings for school level staff so a unified voice is heard throughout the district. The next area around MTSS, written guidance, create a user-friendly MTSS manual, electronic dashboard, leverage ways to show how students are improving through this. AIS, this is something that came up time and time again around lack of timely supports for AIS in terms of when it starts, and concerns were raised about quality. start the services earlier in the year and address concerns around quality and behavioral supports, because inevitably MTSS is more than just academics. Ensure that there's a behavioral component to it. We talk about behaviorists later in the report. In this particular instance, access behaviorists, access others too who have a background in supporting the behavioral needs of students, but include and envelop behavioral supports into the program. Next, I'd like to talk about identification practices, CPSE exits. So this is preschool. Ensure formal written protocols and a consistent understanding among teachers and administrators around the process and regulation of declassifying preschool students prior to becoming kindergarten. There were a number of issues raised related to declassification among preschool, and this requires further study for ensuring consistency. And monitoring. It is especially in small districts. It's always the case in small districts where you have your numbers are just small. Nevertheless, keeping an eye on categories, may they be racial categories or otherwise, gender, etc., to ensure there are not patterns of over or under identification by race or disability category. And in our report, we talk about this in greater detail, especially in the disability classifications of emotional disability or multiple disabilities. Next, IEP development, written procedures. We recommend the district include written special ed guidance standards and examples for IEP development processes that are appropriate and consistent across the district. We go into detail as to why in the report. Monitoring IEPs so that you are over time doing self-checks on how you're doing. Establish and implement a process for periodically reviewing student IEPs for consistency with expected standards. And collaboration, fostering positive CSE collaboration by including more planning time between gen ed and special ed teachers as a way of enhancing and improving the process by which IEPs are created. The next, inclusive practices, planning, guidance, and implementation. Review the district's full inclusion definition and ensure that all staff understand its meaning. This is something we heard in interviews, we heard in focus groups, we saw on the staff survey. Educators have mixed definitions around what full inclusion is. And there is, in some cases, confusion between full inclusion versus mainstreaming or integration. Ensure that that's not happening. Next, implementation guide, develop a clearly articulated school and district implementation guide based on inclusive education framework with expected guidance and procedures and practices, and that should be based off the definition. Schedule time for collaboration. Again, there needs to be time for folks to understand what this means so they can work on it. Written guidance for the use of schedules. This is an important piece here. Making sure, and I'll be very clear on this, making sure that master schedules are not limiting students from special education services. And this is something that in the report we go through in much greater detail. It's something we saw, we observed during classroom observations, as well as heard about it, as well as through parent focus groups, as well as staff interviews, as well as the survey, that this is happening in the middle school, and it shouldn't be. And so this is something that I think will be also of great importance as it relates to all these recommendations. And I should say these recommendations are intentionally not in rank order. They're numbered, but they're not in rank order. We expect the district to look at these and say, yes, we want to embark upon these in this time frame, these in this time frame, and these in that time frame. As we acknowledge, this may take a while based on which you choose and when. So you may hear urgency in my voice, but we did not rank these on a scale, so to speak. Next, general education, classroom composition, collaborative teaching, co-teaching, and learning centers. Drafting guidance and for collaborative and consultative teaching. A biggie here is ensuring that students are not limited to receiving a maximum of 2 hours of service of consultative teaching when their IEP team may agree that there need to be additional services. We heard in different forums that there is a belief among some that there is a 2-hour maximum of services that can be delivered as it relates to consultative teaching. Inclusive co-taught instruction, drafting guidance for the delivery of this based on the most effective model for instruction. Professional development, making sure once there's a handle on this, that there is professional development to support it so that everyone is singing from the same sheet music. And learning centers, which I know in some places, in some buildings, they're referred to as learning centers, other it's resource rooms, provide these at the elementary schools for students who may require some pull-out services or supplemental services in an environment that meets their needs in their IEPs. By virtue of having that does not reduce the district's commitment to inclusion. In fact, it may enhance it by providing additional supports in a manner that meet that student's needs so that once they are with their typically developing peers, they're doing so in a manner that's even more robust and in their favor. 6, out of district placements. Talk with parents and CSE teams who sought or obtained out of district placement to understand their motivations and obtain information about the most common out of district placements to figure out what's different between the resources that they are getting in their out of district placement as it relates to what could be happening at school if they were still in their neighborhood school. 7, inclusive education, vision, and planning. Some of these may sound redundant. That's not an accident. Renewed guiding vision and mission of full inclusion, because the district embarking on this is commendable. So articulate it in a manner that all can understand the vision and the mission, from leadership on down to all the educators. Ensure that educators are not mistaking this for integration or mainstreaming. Create clear expectations. So communicate to schools, parents, the broader community that the district expects to take steps to ensure that students with disabilities make the greatest amount of progress possible in the general ed curriculum or modified curriculum per IEPs through rigorous and high quality standards aligned instruction, and specifically designed instruction and interventions along with differentiated instruction, accommodations, modifications, all of which we saw and throughout our classroom visit. I think they, however, feed into the next items. Inclusion is not merely mainstreaming or integrating. Inclusion can still be achieved when students, especially students with complex disabilities, receive additional specialized services and supports outside of the general education classroom at times. And 4, partnership with families are critical for trusting and collaborative partnerships as it relates to all of that. And we think that in terms of making that something that will actually be realized, a strategic plan around this, developing a long-range strategic plan based on these recommendations as well as other relevant information to support it. Cross-departmental collaboration, increased collaboration with the Office of Curriculum and Instruction that will go hand in hand with the Office of Pupil Personnel Services to make sure that both offices are operating in lockstep, and that includes the special ed office. Albeit we know the Office of Pupil Personnel Services is a relatively new office, a new function in the district. And it's to be expected that there may be, changes, so to speak. And there was a recent leadership change on top of that. But ensuring that those are working hand in hand will be very important. Collaboration between the Office of Special Education and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Wellness. Collaborate on matters such as the identification of racial minorities with disabilities to ensure that students are not being over-identified. That office brings a different perspective to this than the Office of Special Education. Nevertheless, they're acutely aware of the needs that are occurring in the district as it relates to students who may potentially at some point be at risk for over-identification. Collaborative work use these collaborative partnerships to establish consistent and integrative approaches to support the work. And KPIs, this goes back to strategic planning. Set goals, realize it, and make sure you're doing what you want to do. And this feeds into action planning, which we'll discuss a little bit. Administrator visibility in schools. Ensure the special education director and the assistant superintendent for pupil personnel services are known faces in the buildings. Establish opportunities for staff within the buildings to meet and collaborate. I know that, this is all happening. Changes in staff, changes within office, all happen within the thick of a pandemic. Nevertheless, we heard loud and clear a very strong desire for teachers on up to get to know these folks in a way that they knew prior administrators in those roles, or in the role of the director in particular. Special education planning, 10 as it relates to professional development, includes special education in the district's existing professional development planning. One thing we heard over and over again was that it's inherent within the district's PD portfolio, differentiation, inclusion, core components of universal design are inherently baked into the professional development. We think that's great, keep that up. But at the same time, there will be needs for PD that may be very specific to a certain group of students. May it be students on the spectrum, may it be other students. Your special education teachers know best, as well as your special administrators. They're saying, we love the PD, but we'd like to see more as it relates to special ed. 11, standard operating procedure manual. I think the more consistency you have across the district on special education procedures and practices, the easier it's going to be for folks to be on the same page. Given the amount of administrative change there's been, as well as communication style differences, this will be of use. Assistive technology, and this is a process matter. It's interesting, we're approaching it from a process perspective. Typically it's not, but I think a lot of the process behind assistive technology at times is hindered on things when it gets complicated, like speech generating devices. You've got some very talented speech and language pathologists in your district who are working their tails off to get these devices working. I think they want and they need, from what we saw, more support as it relates to providing the services as well as the functionality supported by someone with assistive technology background. And budget, this is something that we noted in the report. We did not, and we're not able to see a budget that was organized in a way that was building by building for special education expenditures. There's real utility in being able to look at special education programming, budgeting by building, by program, because at the end of the day, it helps as it relates to efficiencies that ultimately support student success. 12, record keeping. Community trust. There is a community trust issue among some parents, enough that it was notable to put in this report around record keeping. And we believe that to build trust, implement the recommendations in this report and publicly report how the district is doing. Twice a year is often the measuring stick for this, but the district may choose another way of measuring. But measure progress and share it. The next is board mandates. Ensure the board has the required documentation on the provision of services for children with IEPs in the form of a list. And this is consistent with New York regulation, which there is a requirement that board members receive certain information regarding the provision of services. It doesn't per se require IEPs, redacted IEPs be delivered or be part of a board member's packet in the district. That is the present practice, and we can talk about more during Q&A if you'd like. 13, enacting report recommendations. Implement, publicly report progress. So much of this is going to hinge upon action planning. You as a district are going to choose some of these and say, these are urgent. This is going to be 1 year. You may say these items here are going to be 3 years. These items here will be 5 years. And maybe some of these items we're not going to embark upon. But I firmly believe, we firmly believe, that in order to build community trust, implement recommendations, and publicly report on them to ensure that people are involved and they're hearing about it. 14 website, there's information on your website that's dated. This is an easy fix because you've got a good website. Annually review it, update it, make sure it's current. The vision, collaborative vision, build a, and I think your opportunity for this is great. You've got new leadership. You'll have a new person in the Office of Pupil Personnel Services. You got a relatively new director, special ed. Create a core belief vision statement that's agreed upon in terms of the ideals between district and family, and keep on building on the training and communication with families as it relates to IEP process, the role of the child study team or CSE, helpful hints for parents at home. This is happening, and I think there's a hunger for even more. Building a vision around it will make it easier to execute. And now we've reached questions, and I think we've done a good job of keeping time. I've tried. And so the way we're prepared to answer questions, I will take the question, and then based on the subject matter expert that may be able to answer best, most appropriately, I'll also channel it to them too.
Do we have time for questions?
I don't know. I think we need to have questions. This went way over, but I don't think it makes sense to skip the question.
Okay, yeah, it seems like we went over a little bit. Can I go first?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, special ed has been and continues to be a very important.
If you could speak up, I'm sorry.
We can't hear you.
Special ed has been and continues to be a very important part of our district. Every member of this Board of Education, administration, faculty takes it very seriously. That's why we embarked on this audit. Because we always want to continue improving what we have. We have many families who move here because of the special education focus we have. That said, please go back to page 6.
6 of the slide deck?
Yes.
Okay.
So since this is a executive summary of the Board of Education, you read these 8 questions to us. Please give us the answers to these 8 questions.
So what we did in our report was we outlined a series of recommendations that align to these questions.
Okay, so does the CCSD special education program foster effective teacher pedagogy support and professional development to support students with IEPs? Yes or no? Do we do that?
I will say that, you know, what we intentionally aligned the recommendations to these questions. I'm not.
Are the district payment services effectively organized to support a free and appropriate faith in the latest restrictive LRE for students with IEPs? What's the answer to that question? Simple.
Would you?
Very easy to answer.
We can certainly identify it within the report. I mean,
forget the report. What's the answer?
So you would like me to go through each of these? Is that what you're asking?
You read them to me, Michael. Please answer the questions.
I think that the way we did this was we designed a proposal based upon the RFP, and the specifications that we set forth in our proposal made it clear that we were going to use these as our guiding questions to create recommendations thereafter that align.
So we're saying, what did we want to know? These are the questions we want to know. What's the answer to these questions?
They're in the report, and there are several of them which we can read through in their entirety if that's.
You've already read those to us. Let me go to the next point.
Okay.
You mentioned, let's see if I can find it here. maybe if somebody else wants to go first.
Okay, I have a question that probably is more of an internal, we need to figure it out, but given how much you've looked at the district, the question I have is, one of the recommendations you make relates to collaborative co-taught classes. And obviously these are classes that generally have both a cohort of students who have IEPs and a cohort of students who do not. And I guess the question I have is, as you've worked with other districts in implementing programming, how do you ensure that in a district of the size similar to ours, where our elementary school classes, I would say on a whole, are not small, not huge. If we take an average of like 100 kids per grade per elementary school, how do you structure a CTT or C class so that you don't end up with a cohort of students who are moving together by virtue of having IEPs from year to year, when the rest of the, let's say 90 other students in the class are being mixed up each year by virtue of not being in the CTT or ICT class?
I'll start by answering that, and then I'll pass the baton to Dr. Petroff. A lot of this has to do with looking at, and for the district, now that you have this report, to look at your staffing allocations. One thing that we saw time and time again, your elementary schools, you had collaborative co-taught classrooms where teachers were having to dance from location to location because of the way the schedule is configured, not necessarily because they had designed it that way. They had it their way, they would have been there all day with the teacher. And so that there's a component to this, which is really, how are you leveraging your existing staff so that you can be offering the programming effectively and giving teachers the time they need to be there so they're not having to race to the next location. Dr. Petroff, what would you add to that?
I had a little bit difficult time understanding, or not understanding the question, but to hearing the question. But let me just address the fact that I concur with you, Matthew, that maybe reorganizing some of the services and some of the staff may be one level in which you can do that. Securing that, and I did hear a concern about students being moving together in one, over and over, and not being, I guess, exposed or even have interaction with the variety of students that are in your in the school. And there are ways that we can look through that. And some of those ways are to increase the continuum of service support, supports, and that will influence it. And you're absolutely correct that in smaller districts, it can become a difficulty. However, it also means that that your students that have not been identified with IEPs are also know each other much better. So we'd have to take a look and strategically plan. And I always say there's a right way and a wrong way. And I guess, for my district's way. And that's what has to occur here in Chappaqua, because everything is, there are places where we can reorganize and distribute the talent that you have to try to prevent that, once that's established as something you want to prevent. And then, so that's the best I can do in terms of that.
Thank you, Dr. Petroff.
Hi, thank you. First of all, I do thank you for highlighting the ways in which we are effectively supporting all of our special ed students, and we make a huge commitment to that in our district. And so we appreciate the commendations, but obviously we are here for the recommendations because we always seek improvement. and we want to provide the best services to all of our students. And one of the questions that I had involves one of your recommendations, or just, it's a general question too, though, with respect to some of the recommendations. And this one talks about multi-tiered system of supports and developing an MTSS cross-departmental district level leadership team. And I know you discussed that, saying that that was important and not to silo things in special ed. I guess my question with this particular recommendation and a number of the other ones is whether you can provide us with good examples of charts or systems that you have seen work in other districts and compared to ours, and maybe ways that we can improve it, because we definitely also, since I've been on the board, we've made a big push to restructure special ed. As you mentioned, we created a new position as an assistant superintendent for people and personnel services.
Yep.
We've restructured the department to provide the best services to our students that we can. And so I guess for us, it would be interesting to see like what has worked in practice versus theory in terms of recommendations, and whether that's something that you might be able to follow up with, with us to say, well, here's a suggestion, as opposed to have a bunch of recommendations that it might be hard for us to implement and make changes to something that we think is working, and we're always trying to improve, unless we have a suggestion as to maybe a different direction to go in that might prove to be even better service. So that's my question.
I'll take a stab at responding in that I agree that it's so important to be looking at exemplars where it's actually worked and worked well. A lot of this level of thinking happens through action planning. Once a district receives a report like this, they take a deep breath and say, okay, what are we going to embark upon? That's the first thing. And then how are we going to embark upon it? I think the good news is that within your district, you have a leadership team that is well aware of what MTSS is in many cases. Can PCG help? Can we help with the action planning as it relates to that to ensure that you're following best practice in MTSS? Absolutely. Districts will often create their own internal committee to say, let's internally figure out what's the best path forward as it relates to MTSS within our district. Sometimes they do it internally, sometimes they bring an external partner in on it. I think, though, that you are in a good place in that you have so many people who know what it is and actually very easily and comfortably and candidly shared with us what they would like to see, knowing what they know about MTSS. But absolutely, PCG can certainly help in that venue. That would be action planning. That's, it's a recommendation, is a report is the first step, and then the district has to figure out, okay, now we need to action plan thereafter, and this would be part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I see a lot of recommendations in here, and I might have missed it, but I see a lot for IEP students, but I don't see anything about 504s. And if you think that students with 504s should also have IEPs, because we know that both plans provide for accommodations, but only IEP provides for specialized instruction for the students. So is that something that I missed, or is that?
The simple answer to that question is that it wasn't within the scope of work. When we embarked upon this work, it was specific to students with IEPs. And so 504 is something that the district certainly can and should look at, but we looked specifically at students preschool to postgraduate who are the recipients of services through the Individuals with Disabilities Act and have IEPs.
Okay, so do you think that the 504 students should be looked at
alongside the students with IEPs?
I think that would be a separate matter. I know districts do conduct reviews of their students with 504s, but that's a separate, it falls under a different purview, so to speak, and so it would be looked at differently. There certainly is overlap, but it is a different it's a different area. Even though it's supporting students with disabilities, it's doing so in a different way.
Okay, I would need clarification on that, but I can talk to the administration about that.
Okay.
I also had another question. So I know you said that you didn't rank the recommendations, but is there a way that you would prioritize the recommendations?
No, we intentionally don't. I think that, and we're happy to work with the district in action planning. The key to this is action planning. A plan is only a plan. And I would hate to see this go in a shelf somewhere. And I'm quite certain the district won't let that happen. When we were interviewed by the district, that was something that was actually raised. Its desire to make sure that didn't happen. Action planning allows for the district to say, okay, which of these do we see as most urgent? Your district administrators know this inside and out. We come in as an outsider looking at it from a big picture perspective. I would suggest, and this is how we work, that it's the district, your folks at central office on down, who can be essential in determining the rank and subsequent desire as it relates to the order. So we know they can't all be done overnight. Some of these are going to take time, 2 years, 3 years, depending on how the district chooses to embark upon them.
Right. Yes, I think ultimately our administration would be the ones that would make that final decision. But as a consultant group, I'm asking if you would have any prioritizing recommendations or a pacing calendar. There's no examples.
Yeah, it's something that is inherent in the work we do, and I think we were transparent when we had the conversation up front with the district during our proposal to the RFP, that we intentionally do not rank because we believe the district personnel know the district better than we do. It's our job to determine and define recommendations based on opportunities for improvement, but it's the district's job to then say, okay, we know where our spots are within our respective buildings. So we did not do that by design.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm sorry I'm coming to this a little bit late. So I wasn't involved in the RFP process, but I do have a
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, is this better?
Better, thank you.
So just a few questions. On page 24, you talk about being consistent with best practices and meeting mandates in the New York City regulations. Do you have a list of those best practices? It's hard to align to them if we don't know what they actually are. Obviously, we have what we thought were best practices, but there may be others. So I'd love to see a list of what those are and are implemented elsewhere.
Are you referring to the board mandate?
No, collaborative teaching, page 24.
Collaborative teaching. We've actually, within the report itself, created a rather robust section with examples and citations to best practice literature on that.
Second one is a question, more of a thought on full inclusion. I started on my board service back in the mid 2000s, and it seems like that concept has evolved and changed over the years. The idea of pulling kids out, resource rooms, was really frowned upon when inclusion was first implemented. It was really pushed in as much in-class, co-taught class time as possible. So I'm curious as to, has that evolved because that's not the ideal thing for students, that students with these more complex needs need those resource services or one-on-one service side of a co-taught classroom situation? And are we sliding, and is the pendulum swinging in a different direction, saying the ideals of full inclusion are important, but we're
we might be missing the forest through the trees when we're not providing students with services that they need, different environment, a more restrictive environment, so to speak.
I would argue, inclusion has certainly evolved. At the same time, students can be included to the maximum extent possible while also receiving supports in a resource setting, especially if it's going to enhance what's going on throughout the rest of the day. Barbara, would you like to talk to that? And Jerry, if there's anything additional thereafter?
Yes, I do. I think the concept, full inclusion is a philosophical concept. And the idea is that if you say what it means, does it mean that all students will be fully included in general education classes? But just saying that is not enough. It has to be that all students are included with all of the supports and accommodations and modifications and services that they need. So what we know, you can't have a model that is a full inclusion model that has been established that is the same for all children. So what was identified here is that the focus on inclusion is absolutely wonderful, but it has to be coupled with the needed services, and that may be more than are available at the moment. So it may work for many children, and it clearly does, but some students need different services. They may need specialized services. Doesn't mean they're not being included. And I think what we can see is that there are students who, because of the need for some other things, are sent to another district. So they're not being fully included because of a lack of service, certain services, because of limitations. And we heard this from all levels at the school district, that there was a small group of students that are not able to be included, whether that is included in the district, the school, the class. And I think one thing I want to mention that is in keeping with what's been said before, you have really great staff, and I think many of them had tremendous ideas about what would help. So you have the benefit of having people who could get around because they're the ones identifying the issues. They're also speaking to the frustration of students that cannot be included in the program that exists because it needs greater flexibility. It needs to, perhaps these limitations on services are something that doesn't allow a student to be included. And that's why I think we talked in the report about defining what full inclusion means. Because if you think about full inclusion from the student point of view, not this is a full inclusion program, it means they get all the different things that they need to be successful. And some of that may be some program out of the classroom for a little bit. I think we talked about that.
I'd like to quickly add something and then turn it to Jerry, Jerry and I did classroom visits. And one thing that struck me that we saw from time to time was that a student may physically be included in the room, but they may be flanked with a paraprofessional on one side, a special education teacher on another side, and the lesson that's occurring at the front of the classroom may not be what's happening at that child's desk. Is that inclusion? Could there be benefit for that child to be receiving instructions prior to the class so that when they are in the class, they are ready to go? And it was tough to see. And Barb,
I want to add to that point is that the concept, the evolution of the concept is that it is not about just being in a placement. It is about getting all of the different services that allow you to be successful and have access to that program.
Thank you.
Dr. Petrov, would you add anything to that?
Yeah.
Can you just hold on a second?
Oh,
Just 1 second, because we're way over time. So we need to get organized here on our end. So go ahead, Hillary.
Okay, I think Allison had another
Just one quick, more of a comment than a question. all of these recommendations are really, helpful, and obviously the district will look at them and prioritize. There's always the issue of fiscal responsibility and administering these solutions and, making changes and being fiscally responsible. And so I just always want to make sure that when we're looking at this, meeting students' needs in the inclusive environment, and also thinking about the impact of when you talk about scheduling and teachers moving around, are usually budget issues and planning issues. And I don't want to get lost in that, or have that get lost in this also, because it is important to the taxpayers that we make changes and that we think through the fiscal impacts.
So, I don't know.
I have one more question, but I'm not going to ask you at this point. It's okay. No, it's fine. I don't need to ask you. Thank you.
Okay, we have a very long report from you guys, which is very thorough, and obviously we couldn't go through in its entirety, but it's something that we are going to be looking at in a lot of detail, obviously, and working with going forward. And you check back in with you and ask further questions. And I assume that's something.
And just like with the equity audit, which you will see tonight in the superintendent's report, the district will come back to the board at our next meeting and talk about some immediate next steps we'll be taking as a result of this audit. So Matthew, we look forward to receiving the final report from you, and we will post that, a copy of this presentation, as well as the link to this presentation on our website within the next week. So thank you very much. We appreciate your presentation tonight, Matthew, and we'll be in touch. And thank you to your colleagues for joining us as well.
Thank you, Dr. Ackerman. And you should be in receipt of the full report, but thank you very much. It was a pleasure working with the district and look forward to continuing doing so. Have a good night.
You too.
Okay.
Yeah, we need a 2-minute break.
Okay. All
All right, give us 2 minutes.
I move that we recess for 2 minutes.
Okay, I will second that. All in favor?
All right. I move that we resume the meeting.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank
Okay.
you for bearing with us.
All right, thank you, everybody. So before I move into the community update, I just want to mention that on the agenda tonight is the draft calendar for 2022 and 2023. You'll see that this looks very different than the calendar had last year, and it all has to do with where dates fall and the required number of days students are to be in session and professional development requirements for staff. So what I would share with you is if you have any feedback that you'd like the board to consider before they move on adopting the calendar at the next meeting, please send that to the Board of Education and me in writing so we can look at that. Did the board at this time have any feedback or questions regarding what the calendar looks like moving forward?
No, just can it be, is there, I don't know what people are seeing at home, but I assume it's this. but
Oh,
should we-
it's the calendar's linked on the
Okay,
agenda.
great, perfect, as long as they've
I
accessed it.
also placed it on the homepage because I know it's very important to people, so it's easy to access.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
right
no, I
under
just wanted
board
to make
reports.
sure the tech piece
Okay,
of this.
I would like to talk about some additions to this year's calendar, but I'd like to wait until we're done with the equity part of this presentation because the calendar adjustments that I'm proposing for you to consider moving on tonight are related to professional learning. Right, so we have different people in the audience today. So for those of you who are new, I usually start the meeting talking about COVID. Been doing this for about almost 2 years now. And so I just want to start by sharing with you our vaccine rates. As predicted, they're going up. We have many buildings that are over 80% at this point. I anticipate at our next meeting, it's probably likely that most of our buildings will be over 80% vaccinated and our high schools will be steady at 96%. I'd like to thank our families for making the decision to move forward and having their children receive the vaccine. It just supports the district in its quest to keep our students and staff healthy in our buildings. I also want to thank our parents. We had about 100 of them who participated in our vaccine program here with the Westchester County Department of Health. So to the Department of Health, our families, and then our administrative team who help support that event for our students. Okay, so our positive cases. So instead of doing our quarantine numbers, since we're not contact tracing, we don't really have quarantine numbers to share. I've transitioned to sharing our positive cases. So from Saturday to this afternoon, we have 15 positive cases in the district based on lab certified tests and 21 positive cases in the district based on home test reports. I just wanted to show you what that looks like over time since we've returned from break. So the dates that are before our current numbers are all week aggregates. So they're going to be higher because there's more days that are accounted for, but just so you can understand where we're trending, we had numbers for the first 2 weeks when we had returned around 100, and then they dropped to about 80. And now our projections are if we stay on this trend, we'll have less numbers at the end of this week. So that's good news for the district. In terms of our testing information, I share this with the community every weekend. When we have a meeting, I just want you to understand who's coming in and taking advantage of testing every Monday. We've seen a significant drop in the number of people that are coming to campus for testing. As you may recall, since we returned from break, we opened testing to all of our students regardless of their vaccination status. But I also would like to share that there's a different opportunity for people now to be tested. We're distributing home tests to anyone who asks us for one. So we've had a number of boxes that have been distributed. We've had over 100. There's 2 tests in each box, and I'll go over again very briefly how families can sign up to receive a box from their school. And staff, of course, have the opportunity to receive boxes from the district office. So we have some new procedures, and this has all been in place. So this is not new information, but as I had mentioned before, the district is no longer contact tracing based on a notification we received from the Westchester Department of Health, but we are notifying families differently when there's an exposure. So if your child's on a bus route where there's an exposure, meaning there was an infectious person on the bus, that entire route is being notified. We are notifying our athletes if there's an exposure on a team. And then because our high school lunch is not designed in a way where children are 6 feet apart, if your child sat with someone who was infectious, you will be notified by us by email. This is all an email notification process. It's been working well for us. I just want to talk about transportation. So we are going to have kids continue to sit in their assigned seats. We'll have siblings sit together because if there is an exposure on the bus, consistency in seating will reduce the number of students who are close contacts. So it just makes sense logically based on what the rules look like for now, based on how we're supposed to be operating, but we are going to cease doing our arrival and dismissal procedures in the morning. It takes time for us to do that, and it impacts the elementary runs. So because we have more flexibility in our notification procedures and we're not actually contact tracing anymore, and we feel like we have reestablished our seating assignments, and there is no need for us to take attendance on the bus, we are going to go back to our previous procedures moving forward. Should we find that this becomes problematic, or should there be some shifts in how we need to operate, we'll just make an adjustment and go back. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, families can receive a home test from us. If children and staff are symptomatic and they're vaccinated, they can use these tests now to return to school. They just need to test twice. One test needs to be administered before students plan to come back to school, and then one test needs to be administered in the morning that they're planning to come back into the building. I think that's been really helpful for our families that they no longer need to go and receive medical clearance from a doctor. Our medical director would still like our non-vaccinated students to go through that procedure, so that's where we are right now at this time. And but any student or staff member whose parents or they themselves are concerned about exposure, regardless of their vaccination status, can certainly pick up a test from the district office. We'll distribute that. We have a sign-up process that's online. We have a reporting process because we want to know the results of those. But it's very fluid, and I would encourage our families to take advantage of this. Okay, masking. So as Hillary had mentioned in her report, masks are still required. If the requirement is listed and masks become optionals, I just want to share with the community that while that may be released in some way, the district may need time to send out their notification to the community that masks will go on. And the reason for that is twofold. First, based on how that information is really time to understand it, to process it, and to make sure that I'm communicating accurate information out. So for example, there was news about this court ruling in Nassau County, and I wasn't in a space where I felt like I could send anything out that night or in the morning because I just wasn't ready. I didn't want to push out information that was inaccurate, and I didn't want to make a decision in such a short amount of time that would have a substantial impact on many of our families. So if in the future there is mass discretion, which now we don't have, and that is communicated to me, and it's communicated in a way that I can't substantiate it, or it's late in the evening, I may need time to send out the communication to our families and to our staff that masks will be optional moving forward. And I'll prepare all of this and I will send this out tonight to our families so they understand that. But I do want to thank everyone for their patience. I have found since the pandemic has began that the accuracy of our messages are very important. And because things are released in the media, because parents read information, that doesn't mean that I have the right information that I need to use to make decisions to send that out to our families. So sometimes it's best to wait so that I can make sure that I'm accurate, because while I understand certain families feel one way about a particular issue like masks, other families feel a completely different way. And so I just need to be sensitive to everybody when I'm communicating. So I hope people understand that. But I would like to, with the board's permission, share another update with the community after this meeting as to the position moving forward on masks, because I think it's really important that people understand the direction that we're going in now that we know that this might be a reality in the future. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay, so now we're going to transition to our equity work. So I just want to share with you, this is the meeting where I would share with you our quarterly report for our hate speech, bias, and discrimination incidents. So you'll see we had 4 in the middle school and 1 in the high school, and they were all related to hate speech. And so I'll provide another update for you at the end of Q3, and then again at the end of the school year as per our code of conduct. So at this point, I'd like to introduce to the community, and of course our board is well aware that Philip Marcus is here with us. He's our Director of Equity, and we had our equity audit, equity, inclusion, and wellness, and we had our equity audit at our last meeting. So we wanted to share with you some of our thinking moving forward based on Insight's recommendations about how we plan to plan forward for the remainder of the spring semester and into the summer. So I'm going to turn over the clicker to Philip.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Ackerman. So my name is Philip Marcus, Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Wellness. And tonight I'm here to speak to some of the steps that the district has taken to center our students and to create culturally affirming spaces where their identities can be affirmed. So as we begin, something that I'd like to talk about are 4 specific areas, the steps that we've taken in terms of our professional learning, teaching and learning in elementary, middle, and high school, the work with students, and also our next steps, our consultant, Insight Education Group, as a result of their comprehensive audit. So in terms of professional learning, there are a few areas that I'd like to highlight. So over the course of the last year, we've conducted ongoing meetings with teachers, teacher leaders, including our department chairs, our grade level leaders, and our building administrators to support culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogy within the classrooms. Also, we've done facilitation of color lines and in-service course, facilitation of the CHAP Equity Pride Fellowship, consultation to support our BIPOC affinity team, to support our staff members of color, consultation to support White Allies Affinity team, facilitation of various sessions of new teacher orientation, and of course, supporting professional learning of the leadership team. Next, I'd like to highlight some of the work around teaching and learning. So first, part of the work that I'm doing with my staff developer, Tanuke Kulpa, and also Mary Devane, staff developer for social studies, we're helping our 7th and 8th grade teachers to reimagine the scope and sequence for U.S. history through in-person meetings, peer visitation, and also learning walks. An additional step, we partnered with staff developers to really center equity across the instructional continuum. So that includes collaborating with staff developers in the area of literacy, science, social studies, math. And then we have facilitated sessions at faculty meetings within buildings, including work to model using windows and mirrors to build culturally affirming identity spaces. In the high school, we facilitated professional learning for the special education faculty to nurture more inclusive spaces for all learners. We conducted a communication analysis with the guidance department to further support inclusivity, making sure that no student feels marginalized in this. And also we have facilitated sessions with our peer leadership on racism in order to support the Greeley community. In middle school, we've consulted with the World Language Department to ensure that the curriculum is culturally responsive and relevant to student experiences. We've consulted with teachers to integrate land acknowledgement language into daily learning experience. And we have worked with our clinicians and our counselors to reimagine student support systems to help foster a greater sense of community. In elementary, we've worked with teachers in support and bias and ensuring that there's inclusivity in text. So along with that windows and mirrors work, we've also worked with various grade levels across the district to support culturally responsive and sustaining curriculum. And we have worked one-on-one with classroom teachers who are in need of support when supporting specific students, specific curricular priorities, and to support restorative practices. And to our work with students. So in addition to supporting the BIPOC Student Union, we have also expanded Unity Days. So now it occurs twice a year. It both involves middle and high school. And sessions and the focus are all student driven. We've also built capacity for that student facilitated work through the Student CHAP Equity Fellowship and also our peer leadership group. And one of the final steps is really looking at the innovation committee and really exploring the idea of a unity center at Greeley High School. And to speak to some of the work with Insight Education Group as a result of their comprehensive audit, we have created a timeline where we'll establish a district equity team by April 5th. And this fellowship will take the form of a fellowship opportunity. So pending approval, and then faculty, staff, and administration from all buildings will be involved in this committee. Also, as an additional step, we'll establish a school equity team, and that will be established by June 15th. And that will be comprised of building faculty who will be leading the work in collaboration with their principals and their building leaders. Right. And now I'm handing the clicker back.
Okay. All right. So I just want to share with you that, as I had mentioned previously, we have professional learning days that I did not enter into the calendar because I was waiting for this
equity report to be released. And so now that we're in a space where we know what our focus of our professional development will be for the remainder of the semester based on their suggestions, I'm asking that you consider adding early dismissal dates to the calendar. I have done in this recommendation is I have paired them along breaks or long weekends as to reduce the impact of these days on our families, because I know that can be a potential hardship for some members of our community. So that is the first thing. I don't know what's happening, but the thing keeps going in and out. So that's the first thing that I would like you to consider. The second is just so you understand that we'll be using our full day that's already in the calendar to support our professional learning program moving forward. So our work for the remainder of this semester will be focused on building culturally competent classrooms, which is aligned with our strategic plan. We need to do a lot of training on implicit bias. And then, of course, building our new teams, specifically our DET team. And then Tony, Adam, and I just want to explain to you some of the work that we'll be engaged in at the district level based on the recommendations. So the policy committee and I will be meeting with Insight to go over their recommendations for consideration in the code of conduct, which ultimately will be presented to the community in a hearing this summer to see if we should make any revisions based on some of their analysis of our discipline practices. Tony, would you like to talk about recruitment and retention?
Yes, thank you, Christine. So we are going to be enhancing our recruitment and retention practices, something we've been working on over the last couple of years, but we'll definitely be using some of the recommendations from Insight to inform that work moving forward as we're continuously learning and growing in that area.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be thinking a lot about our district-wide professional learning focus for 2022, 2023, which we've all worked on collaboratively and in partnership with Insight. And so we're excited about that as well. And one of the key things that our district equity team will be working on is part of their biggest, most primary task, a district-wide equity plan.
And then Adam, can you check out the
Yeah, so in collaboration with Josh Kowalbach and Jamie Edelman, we're ready to launch a district data team. It was a thread that was pulled through both the PCG audit of PPS as well as the Insight audit that some commentary around how the district uses data and how we could potentially enhance the use of data to make even more strategic decisions and track our progress over time. So we'll be starting our recruitment for that team. We're ready to launch as of tomorrow morning. So we'll put that team together. You'll hear more about that as we go forward.
Okay, so I just want to thank, this has been a significant process for us, and luckily Luke in the audience today who's been really supportive in helping us engage in this work as the lead professional developer amongst our faculty for equity. And then I want to thank Tony and Adam, and again, Philip, thank you for all of your help and support. This is a really challenging area for us as we continue to make the necessary improvements to support all of our students. And we look forward to working with Insight as we continue this journey. I think if at this time, if you could consider maybe acting on the revised 21-22 calendar, that might be appropriate at this time.
Right, that's what I was going to ask. I know that the 2022-23 is just in draft form, but you do need us to actually approve the revisions to this year's, right?
Right, and my plan would be, if you act on it and if the board approves it, then tomorrow I will send out both calendars, the revised calendar and the draft, so people are very aware of what the draft calendar looks like at this point.
Okay, great. So I will move item 1.2.1, which is the revised 2021-2022 district calendar, which is adding the 3 half days to the calendar. There are no other revisions. Any questions or concerns? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Okay, so that concludes the superintendent's report. Thank you.
Okay. That brings us to committee reports.
I'll start. We had as I said earlier, when the students were up here, we had a joint health and services and facilities committee, advisory committee meeting
Lauren,
last
can you talk
week.
a little closer to the mic?
I'm sorry.
We're having a hard time hearing you. Thank you.
Sorry, that's better. I'll start over. As I said before, when the students were here, we had a joint health and services and facilities committee advisory committee meeting last week where we toured Horace Greeley High School and the Bell School. We went through and looked at some of the areas that have concern or that we have to work on in the future, and things that we've done in the past. Things like the auditorium that looks great now and it's all fixed. The gymnasiums in the high school, we looked at the STEAM lab in Bell. And I'd like to thank Andrew and Joe Gramundo for putting that together for Jane and I and Haley as board members on that from the two committees, as well as the advisory committee members from our community, because a lot of times they don't get to see our schools. They're in to see a teacher or they're in to see an open house. They're spending a lot of time on this committee these committees trying to help us, and I think it was great for them to be able to actually see almost behind the scenes what's going on, and we get their input to help us run our district better. So thank you, Andrew and Joe, and we can talk about policy later.
Yeah, no, the only policy is the one we're going to talk about later, so I don't have anything else. I think that's it for me. Anybody else?
So there was a wellness committee meeting, but I was unable to attend because I was at another meeting. So Jamie Edelman will fill us in.
I actually think the wellness committee and the facilities committee meetings were scheduled for the exact same time, so Kaylee wasn't able to be there. But we did have a meeting on January 17th. It was just a few of our committee members were able to attend, but what we talked about was the wellness day that took place at our two middle schools on the day before the holiday break. And these were days that the two schools did. Mark Brackett was a keynote speaker across the district at both middle schools, and then the students engaged in activities with their teachers that were different than any other day. Teachers shared with them different activities that they love to do, and it was a day to kind of relax and connect on a different level with the adults in the building. We also had a consultant there on that day who did a mindful moment with everybody mid-morning and a stretch break in the afternoon, and the committee feels like this might be something that we want to replicate moving forward, that the wellness committee could get around. So at our next meeting, which is March 15th, we hope to revisit it to see if that could be a annual day that the wellness committee takes an active role in planning and putting on.
Thank you. Great. Anybody else have any committee reports? Okay, so that brings us to the public comment period. We welcome public comments, and in respect for each other's time, we ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Board members may be contacted via email or phone, and after the public comment period has been completed, board members may have a discussion amongst themselves regarding the comments presented. So if you'd like to make a public comment, please come down to the microphone and please state your name and then your comment.
Hi, my name is Dana Gorelick. First, thank you for addressing the mask issue preemptively. I think that's great, and I know a lot of us were interested to hear what you had to say. I think there's one point of clarification that I would like to know, which is if the mask mandate expires and does not get reinstated, I know that the Department of Health was still recommending at times, for example, I think it was in the summer and into the fall, we didn't have a mask mandate for adults. The Department of Health still recommended it for kids. So I think what I heard, and I hope what I heard, is that when the mask mandate lapses, masks can be optional. But I would expect that it's at least possible that at that time, the Department of Health and the Department of Education might say, well, we'd still recommend kids' masks. And so I guess my question would be, in that instance, what is the plan? So depending on your answer to that, I had prepared a bunch of comments related to masking, which I'm going to edit. But I did want to thank the district. I think that you've all done a tremendous job throughout COVID, keeping things as normal as possible for our children, and you've really been leaders in that front. And I would ask that now, as we start to look at the mitigation measures that have been in place, we also lead. We need to look at the data, we need to look at the science, and think about the harm that these mitigation measures are causing our children. I have 2 children in 3rd grade and a daughter that's starting kindergarten. And when I think about her going to school and the challenges of learning to read while everyone's masked, certainly that was something that was appropriate in the spring of 2020 and the following school year. It enabled our kids to get back to school. It protected people before vaccinations were widely available, but they're available now. And so I think it's really an opportunity for our district to continue to lead. And I would request respectfully that the district think about that. Also think about the mitigation measures like social distancing. I know that anecdotally, my kids were told that Pokemon cards were banned. And without really thinking much of it, I figured, oh, they're probably really disruptive. The kids are taking them out. So I didn't ask anything further. Months later, I found out it was because they were getting too close on the playground without masks. And that, again, that's fine. I do think at a certain point in time, we need to look at what these measures are doing in comparison to what protection it's getting. And so I think we're kind of at this tipping point where people are vaccinated. I mean, Dr. Ackerman, you showed the stats. Our district, again, is leading in terms of vaccination. I saw the numbers that our youngest cohort of kids who are able to be vaccinated, I think was in like the 50th percentile or more. Nationally, that's 27. We are doing a phenomenal job taking this pandemic seriously. So I think if not here, oh yes. Okay, I'll just finish, if I can wrap up, please. If we can't, I mean, the other thing went like an hour over. I'd just like to really just conclude
I'm
with
sorry,
one sentence.
it's really easy. The board just needs to extend you for a minute. So
Sorry.
we have just a procedure, so.
Can I have a motion to extend the speaker's time by 1 minute?
Thank you.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
You have 1 more minute.
Thank you. It won't even take that. I really just want to say that if in an area like ours, where so many of the teachers and staff are vaccinated, and so many of the children, and so many of the parents are vaccinated, we have 35 states that don't have mask mandates. Certainly, parents and families who feel that it's important to mask for health reasons or others would be free to do so, but we need to look at all of these mitigation risks, and luckily, we can learn from all of the states that have been mask optional for all of this time. So thank you very much.
Hi there, I'm Dana's husband. Great job. So I'm also obviously a parent of 2 8-year-old boys here in Newcastle and a 5-year-old girl. And I'm a pediatric rheumatologist and immunologist at Columbia. I'm a pediatric rheumatologist and immunologist at Columbia, and I've been a senior author on half a dozen major papers related to Mtss, including the first description of Mtss due to COVID in the United States. I see these kids in the hospital every day, and I've seen what COVID can do to kids. I wear an N95 when I go into a sick patient's room because it's a short exposure and is a high risk. I'm careful, I'm vaccinated, and I'm boosted, and my wife hates that I never want to go out to eat since COVID started. So it's going to shock you to hear what I have to say next. Kids need to be back to normal 100% now, nothing less. And there are 3 reasons for this. Number 1, SARS-CoV-2 infection in children is fundamentally different than it is in adults. Severe critical illness for healthy children while it happens is very rare. And in vaccinated children, it's essentially non-existent. Why is this? Because adults frequently respond to COVID infection with very abnormal hyperreactive response. Children don't do this. So for this reason, children rarely get sick. Pediatricians have felt that it was important to encourage people to get vaccinated by overstressing risk to kids. It happened. And I get where they were coming from. But at the same time, several times during this pandemic, I heard from doctors in my own hospital on TV that the hospitals were full. I would walk upstairs in the ICU and see not a single child with COVID. COVID causing hospitalizations in previously healthy children is very, very rare. The second reason is something you've all seen. So for 2 years, our public health agencies have promoted the idea that cloth masks were effective. Then suddenly in December, they weren't. N95s were not appropriate for kids in August. Now they are. Kids under 12 don't wear masks in England, but they do here. So why is there so much variability? Well, it's because the simple reason that I as a scientist have to deal with a lot. And that is when there's no evidence for something, changes in opinion will radically change practice, much like a mild breeze will topple a house of cards. On the other hand, when something has really been proven it's true, Gravity exists. If I let go of a rock, it falls to the ground. Gravity doesn't go up in August and down in December, or up in England and down in America. The evidence for mask social distancing has always been borderline, and the recommendations prior to this pandemic were exactly the opposite of where they are now. We have been barking, panicked up the wrong tree for 2 years, and we shouldn't be doing this in this school district for sure. The third reason is something a great physician, Maimonides, said in the 12th century. Be clearly aware of the harm you as a doctor can cause. This phrase is central to medicine, and it should be central to societies and schools as well. Good doctors know that doctors can cause. I request another minute. Thank you.
I have a motion to extend the speaker's time by 1 minute.
I move.
Thank you.
One second. All in favor? Aye. You have an extra minute.
Good doctors know that doctors can cause way more harm to a patient than any illness. Wearing masks, social distancing, and most importantly, all of the dysfunctional socialization and dysfunctional learning that comes with this was not a major problem for a few weeks. But for years, it's a huge problem. High school rates, graduation rates have dropped across the country for the first time in 20 years. If this continues for many more years, it's going to be a catastrophe. We have to end it. We do, this school district. I don't need to go to a restaurant or a theater, but my children and yours need to have a normal childhood. How on earth can I justify going to a restaurant when my children are eating behind plexiglass in the school cafeteria? This is absurd. So I'll just finish with another old Jewish saying. If not now, then when? We can't wait and wait and wait and wait. The future is now. It's going to be like this for the next decade at least. Predictions that it's going to be over are going to be as wrong as all the other predictions. We have to move forward and give our children their childhoods back. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and experiences with you all. My name is Ali Shemtab. My husband and I are 6-year residents with 2 children currently attending West Orchard and a 3rd in preschool. I want to start by commending Dr. Ackerman, our school board, and the entire CCSD community for your hard work, efforts, and dedication to our children. I am very grateful to live here, and I want to acknowledge that being one of the few local school districts open full-time last year was a remarkable achievement. I am very pleased to hear that the district will be moving to a mask choice option when this mandate is lifted. With that said, I would also like to acknowledge that this is the 3rd consecutive academic year to be impacted by COVID. I can no longer sit back and helplessly watch as my children's lives are defined by this virus. They are being robbed of the opportunity to experience the carefree innocence that comes with being a child. Like most people in our community, we initially took the virus very seriously. March of 2022 was a dark time, but we accepted all of the challenges that came with it without question because we wanted to stop the spread. But now here we are in 2022, vaccinated, boosted, and still masked, with no end in sight. No metrics to measure when our lives can go back to normal, no off-ramp for the relentless mandates and restrictions we have been living with for so long. Our behaviors and policies need to adjust based on new information, science, data, research. We are not where we were 2 years ago, and our policies should reflect that. I am supporting moving away from mask mandates and moving forward toward a mask choice model in our schools. I don't think this position is controversial. Is it because we can no longer separate politics from good policy? The social, emotional, and psychological health and well-being of our children is of the utmost importance. Why has that become a secondary concern? To put things into perspective, in the U.S. in 2020, firearms killed 4,357 children. 3,639 were lost to motor vehicle accidents. 186 children died of COVID-19. The American Academy of Pediatrics estimates that children account for 0 to 0.2% of all COVID-related deaths. 830 children died from or with COVID over the last 2 years, which is less than total deaths from RSV and flu in a typical pre-pandemic year. So I ask you, if not now, when? because my children are not willing participants in this endless cycle. Our school board was elected to represent and serve the families of Newcastle. I'm here to encourage you to fight for and support our children. It is time to formulate a plan to move forward together, along with other local school districts, as we push Albany. Would I be able to have one more minute, please? I'm almost done.
I'll second.
Thank you. As we push Albany away from mandates toward reasonable and science-driven policies that do not include continuous and indefinite mask wearing. Good policy comes before political allegiance, especially as it pertains to our children. This virus is here to stay, much like the common cold, the flu, and RSV. We must learn to live with it. Please consider measures that will move us past this nightmare we cannot seem to wake up from. Let us normalize a return to normal. It's what our children deserve. Thank you so much.
The last. Hi, my name's Allison Steinbauer. I have a third grader, a kindergartner, and an almost 2-year-old in the district. Thank you for hearing the concerns and suggestions of parents. I'm here tonight to ask the CCSD to continue being a leader in offering a sensible, balanced approach to a safe and fulfilling learning environment for our children. We were a leader in September 2020 when we provided a way for students to return to learning in school at a time when many other districts did not for months. That turned out to be the right decision, unquestionably. We were a leader when we implemented Test to Stay and updated protocols to allow vaccinated students to return to school promptly after recovering from a COVID case. The evidence indicates that the risk profile of COVID-19 has shifted since the early stages of the pandemic. So I urge the district to be a leader in responding to this reality by advocating for students, parents, and the school community. This happens by returning to the normal school environment that our children need to thrive. We are at the point where we already have the tools to protect the well-being of students, family, and staff. We can remove those restrictions that are not effective and that create barriers to learning, thus promoting a return to a positive state of mental, emotional, and social health. The reality is that as we stand here today, things like masking children and having children eat lunch apart from one another or eat snack in a hallway are not tools that meaningfully reduce risk, if they ever did. The inherent risk of COVID to children has always been low, and yet we continue to ask them to shoulder the heaviest burden. Instead, with the widespread availability of vaccines and boosters, we have a tool that virtually eliminates the statistical risk of a severe outcome for children as a population and provides very effective protection for the adults who surround them. As the Omicron surge wanes, we will see rapid testing become readily available again. The existing processes we have to identify positive cases and keep those people isolated from the school buildings are the tools that already meaningfully reduce risk. In contrast, masking and social distancing or imposing restrictions on the way that kids socialize and interact are increasingly being recognized as the least effective tool in our arsenal, especially in a school setting where young kids can't use them consistently and properly. At the same time, it's these restrictions that impose the highest cost on our kids. Incidents of depression, anxiety, and stress are up across the board, and our community is not exempt. Children should be free to socialize and learn with as much normalcy as we can muster without the restrictions that we're doing, just because they must be better than doing nothing at all. Governor Hochul indicated last week that she doesn't expect the mask mandate to be indefinite. When the state mandate lapses, she said, I expect all school districts will say, can I have one more minute? I promise I'm almost done.
Can we have a motion, please? I'll move to extend the speaker's time by 1 minute.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Thank you. I expect school districts will say, we don't have to do this anymore. I urge the board and the administration to be the voice for our children, to advocate for getting to that point as soon as we can. We already have the tools to succeed, and we don't need the ones that harm our children more than they benefit them. As soon as the state acts to respond to this reality, I urge the board and the administration to be a leader and respond in turn to the fullest extent of your power and ability. And then there was kind of one question we had, which does the end of the mask mandate also mean the end of social distancing in schools? Thank you.
So, whereas we don't often say anything after the, okay, that concludes public comment, but I do want to say one thing, which is, as we indicated tonight, whenever there is no longer a mask mandate in effect, the district will move to a mask optional policy, as I said earlier. But I want to be very clear on one other thing, which is that we're not going to break the law. So right now, the mask mandate is the law in this state. It's not our decision. It's not the decision of anybody up here. It's the law in New York State, and we're not going to break the law. As we already said, and as Dr. Ackerman expanded on, when that mask mandate is lifted, the district will communicate. It may not be 10 minutes later, but we will go to a mask optional policy. But I just want to be very clear that we're not going to be breaking the law before that law changes.
So, you know, at the end of comments, we can have comments ourselves. So I think we all have COVID fatigue. I mean, I have COVID fatigue. You know, we're one of the, I've been taking little notes here, we're one of the only districts, if not the only district, that's had our doors open to our students throughout the entire pandemic. And that was due to the tireless work of the faculty, staff, and these education leaders here on stage. You know, one of the reasons we moved to Chappaqua is not just the schools, it's a community, it's a community. We all care about each other, and we want what's best for each other. I mean, some places have these values, some may not, but the reason we live here is because we have values, and we have values in public education. Not just education, public education. I think we need to continue working on this. We need to develop an end plan. We've been talking about that for a while, what we're going to do when this happens. But that needs to meet all our community's requirements, not just students, not just parents. It needs to meet our faculty's requirements. It needs to meet the weakest of us, people who are immunocompromised, people who are our grandparents, people who are in the community that might not be in schools. I mean, we hear you. I hear you. I think we have to do what's right, and we will do what's right. And as Hillary said, we're going to continue working with the rules we have, but we'll come up with plans that allow us to move forward quickly. And that's, I think, what we as leaders of this district have to work on. And I think the comments are great. I think we have to, you know, I think we're all working on this hard. And I just again want to thank. I would beg to call you my colleagues, but the leaders are education leaders here on stage. Andrew and Jamie and Tony and Adam and Christine. I mean, they worked tirelessly since almost 2 years, since March of 2020, when this whole thing broke out. You know, most of the time they spent weekends getting calls and working with the DOH and the CDC and any kind of three-letter acronym you can come up with, just to make sure that we have education for our kids. I mean, I don't want to wear this mask. I'd be happy to rip it off right now if I wouldn't get thrown out of here. But I think it's something we have to continue working on. I mean, I think I hear you. I think everyone hears you.
I'd just like to offer some clarification. So, listen, we have shared goals here, is to get school back to a normal environment for students. But I think the way that we think about moving ahead with those goals are different because, you know, when I think about this community, there's definitely different positions on how people feel we should move forward. And I certainly hear a very loud voice today that we should reduce a lot of the mitigation strategies that we have in place, but there is definitely another voice in this community that's going to be highly concerned with some of the adjustments that we may or may not make in the future because they're nervous. And so when we think about moving forward,
the ultimate goal is for our schools to stay open to students. So at this point, I'm not suggesting any changes to social distancing at all. We may make some adjustments in the future, but I'm certainly not recommending that right now at this time. I also need to think about the adults that we have in this building who work here and how these shifts will impact them as well. But any opportunity that we have to return to normal, we will absolutely take it as long as it's safe. And we'll communicate that out as soon as possible. But I appreciate everyone's position. My kids are in it too. And I want them to have a school experience much like I did when I was in high school and middle school. And I know that they're not. And, I'm sorry that we have a lot of elementary families here today. And I'm really sorry that your kids are experiencing school in this way. It's like the last thing that we want for them. And so we will move as quickly as possible to get back to an environment that we all experienced when we were growing up, but not at the expense of being able to remain open. And I'm sure everyone can understand that. So I always welcome your feedback. Please continue to email me. But please also understand there's a different side of this community that feels very differently than you do, and I need to think about them as well as I push communications out, which is why I was slow in my last communication, because I knew people would be upset if I sent something out that wasn't thoughtful, because they're very nervous about sending their kids to school. So thank you. Okay.
That brings us to approve. Oh, everybody's leaving. That brings us to approvals and ratifications. Can I have a motion, please, for item 3.1, which is accepting the minutes of the January 12th, 2022 board meeting?
I'll move 3.1.
A second. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that brings us to 3.2. 3.2 is our second reading and proposed adoption of policy 3020. I will move item 3.2.
I will second 3.2.
Okay, we discussed this at the last meeting when we had the first reading.
No substantial changes. These were all recommendations from the Health and Safety Committee, and then the Policy Committee added language on where people can file a complaint.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
I recommend 4.1 instructional as presented.
I move that we accept the superintendent's recommendation for item 4.1.
Second. Questions or concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
I recommend 4.2 non-instructional as presented.
I move that we accept the superintendent's recommendation for item 4.2.
I will second that. Are there any questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that brings us to 5. We have one thing. This is the consent agenda, but all we have is item 5.1.
I'm shocked by this. How'd that happen?
Very efficient in our last meeting,
Yes,
and we got
apparently
everything
so.
that we needed to.
All right, so I will move item 5.1, which is the CSE summaries reported to us on today's meeting.
I'll second.
Any questions or concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, then we have item 6.1 is acknowledging a contract approved, by the superintendent for board policy 6085. Can I have a motion for 6.1?
I move 6.1.
I will second that. Any questions, discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We were acknowledging approval, but.
Yeah, I have to talk about this change order.
Okay, item 7.1 is a change order which we are acknowledging. I will move item 7.1.
I'll second.
All right, so I just wanted, this is a late acknowledgement because we had an issue over break that needed to be approved in an unconventional way. So this typically would have been on the next meeting, like the first meeting in January, but because we had staff on site, and when they opened up a wall, they saw something that needed to be fixed. Eric needed to respond immediately, and I needed to approve it
but the paperwork couldn't be completed in a way that we would have it ready for you at the first meeting in January, which is why it's at the second meeting. So I just wanted to explain that because it doesn't really
Okay.
align with our normal procedures.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for the explanation.
You're welcome.
Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, 8. Can I have a motion, please, for items 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3, which is acknowledging receipt of the treasurer's report for December 2021, the receipt of the quarterly extra classroom activity report for December 2021, and the receipt of the claims auditor's report for December of 2021.
I move 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3 together.
I will second acknowledging 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, that brings us to our notice of future meetings. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, February 9th. January's almost over. At 7:30, we'll be back here. We'll have the Greeley High School presentation. And then after that, our next meeting is Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022, also at 7:30, also here, which will be the superintendent's budget proposal. Can I please have a motion to adjourn at 10:28 p.m.?
I move that we adjourn at 10:28 p.m.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.